With Tim and Sheila.
Speaking against the New World Order.
Counteracting deception. You won't do that in 6 o'clock news.
This is a globally orchestrated meltdown to reshape the world into complete totalitarian global governance. Really, the end game here is so sinister, Luciferian eugenics plan. Ask yourself, how is it that out-of-control megalomaniac growth runs things? Tyranny, fear-mongering, drones, geopolitical chaos, financial crises, mass censorship.
If you're planning, you've got to plan in a way to defeat the existing system.
Mindless minions, they're walking around in sort of a zombie-like trance.
I don't know. I just don't know when exactly.
I certainly did not know anything.
There was no knowledge here at the White House.
Do these guys know anything? Out-of-control government gone mad. The founders would be horrified at what we've become. No, I will not comply. Hello, listeners, and welcome to Friday's Antidote radio program. I'm your host, Sheila Zielinski, joined by my co-host, the man who exposed Al Gore and ClimateGate, renowned climatologist, Dr. Timothy Ball. The call-in number for listeners here at our studios is 347-324-3704. And just so listeners know, during the program sometime today, although I know he's traveling, we're going to be joined by the one and only Dave Hodges from the Common Sense Show as well to weigh in on our very interesting subject today. So, Tim, we've touched on depopulation themes, such as Paul Ehrlich's book, Population Bomb, and Obama's science advisor, how ironic, science advisor, John Holdren, and others. And before today, we haven't done an actual full show on depopulation, but Tim, I want to talk today about why the globalists want to exterminate 6 billion people from the planet. Plans which are currently underway, and what we can do as a collective group of people to stop this. So let's jump into the program. Ted Turner, Tim, is a media giant. He's a businessman from Ohio. He's got like an estimated net worth, I think, of about $2 million plus. You know, he created CNN, TNT, TBS. He was a former owner of Atlanta Braves. He also owns the Ted's Montana Grill chain. And he, listen to this, this is very interesting, the largest landowner in the United States of America. And, he's a self-professed philanthropist, and he's the largest single donor to the UN. Very interesting. Now let's flip over to Bill Gates, Microsoft mogul, the richest man in the world. And interestingly, on May 16th, just of this year, Bloomberg announced that Bill Gates was back on top with an estimated net worth of $75 billion. So, let's jump into this idea that these globalists, and like I said before, they're plan on eradicating, exterminating, pick your choice of phrasing. They want to get rid of a large group of the population. And in fact, I'm going to play a couple clips today that I pulled off a couple of YouTube videos to prove to people that are listening when they say, yeah, that's very doubtful. But I will play some clips right out of the words of Bill Gates, right out of the mouths of Bill Gates, Ted Turner's, what their ideal population number is, and it's about 200 to 300 million people. And that's a staggering jump from, 6 to 7 billion, is it not, Tim?
Well, the thing is that all of these people, there are absolute contradictions in what they do and what they say. And one of them, for example, is as business people, they will all say, no, they're opposed to monopolies. The competition is great. But they love monopolies if they've got it. So this is the way that these people work and operate. The center theme to all about control is controlling the people. There is no other purpose than that. If you want power and you want to dictate what happens in the world, you've got to control the people. And of course, when you look at all of the megalomaniacs in history have gone about or set about doing that, getting absolute control, Mao Zedong and so on. And the only debate is what they consider to be a reasonable population size that they can control and then they can manage. But then adding to that they say that they have to reduce the population to a manageable size, and by that
manageable,
they mean
exactly.
Yeah, that they can manage, but they use the excuse of, the Earth can't carry or can't support as many people as it's got, so we're obliged to do this. And of course, this is the game that's always played when you want to get control of somebody. You find a use, a vehicle, a reason. Oh, well, we've got to save the planet. We've got to save water, so on and so forth. So that's what's going on here. And we've talked before, Sheila, about the Club of Rome, Agenda 21, which these people all subscribe to, comes from the Malthusian idea that the world population is outgrowing the food supply. They took that and expanded it and said that the industrialized nations, particularly the monsters like the United States, industrialized nations, are not only outgrowing the food supply, but they're outgrowing and exhausting all of the resources on the planet. And therefore we have to stop this. It's our job to save the planet, and that's what's going on here.
Well, and at the heart of Gates and Turner, and you know what I'm going to do? First of all, I'm going to play, first of all, this clip from Ted Turner on his idea, and I want you to notice a phrase that he throws out there. I'll see if you can pick it up, Tim. It's very brief.
To stabilize the population. When I was born, there was
what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff.
So that is Ted Turner saying, we have global warming, too many people using too much stuff. Now let's listen to Bill Gates.
Take a look. First, we've got population. Now, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3. New vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. New vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Now, what's very interesting to me, did you hear if, we could accomplish this if we create new vaccines, healthcare, new reproductive, are you for real? Did this just come out of this person's mouth?
Yeah, it does come out of their mouth. And what's amazing to me is how they speak so clearly with their foot in their mouth. It's an incredible situation. It's like I always told the students, at the university, you're ready to graduate when you can speak clearly with your tongue in your cheek. And this is the same thing. But notice the thing with Ted Turner. What he's saying is, global warming's due to too many people. Mr. Turner, aren't you saying it's the carbon footprint that people produce? We heard this story. Al Gore was saying, your carbon footprint's too big. And guess who had the biggest carbon footprint in the U.S.? Al Gore. I'd like to know what the size of Ted Turner's carbon footprint is with his private jets and all the rest of it. And so this is the hypocrisy of these people. Oh, no, you go without so that I can continue my lifestyle. And they even created the carbon credits, which didn't reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. It just allowed them to buy what other people couldn't afford and burn more than their share. They created and made money off of it. Gore made money off of the carbon credits thing. And so the hypocrisy of these people and the complete false thinking is given away by the things that they say. But
Kim, and at the heart of, like I said, the heart of Gates and Ted Turner's and the Bernackes and all these guys, the very heart of all their, everything they address lies the central global warming dogma, which dictates that CO2 emitted by human beings are the primary culprit for the unwanted heating of the globe. And since this artificial alleged human-inducing heating effect allegedly stands to absolutely wipe us out and fry us, remember, if left unabated, these proponents of this global warming dogma argue that human CO2 emissions must be reduced, and as Gates casually addresses the issue, he goes on to state that the one way to accomplish this goal is to reduce the global human population. Yeah,
but of course you see that all of this was ignored when they brought out the Kyoto Protocol, which was supposed to reduce the CO2 that humans were producing. But
right.
they didn't actually do that. They created a whole socialist agenda because
sure.
they said, okay, there are 13 nations that were in what was called Appendix A. These 13 nations are producing more than their share of CO2, so they're going to have to reduce. The other nations don't need to reduce at all. And guess who one of the other nations that didn't have to reduce at all, in fact, was going to get paid by these so-called culprit nations in Appendix A, was China. Well, China now is the biggest producer on the planet. And so their whole idea was, there are certain guilty people, the successful people, the people that have industrialized and have improved the quality of life for their citizens, and they've got to pay for their sins of producing this CO2 that's causing global warming and causing others to suffer. I mean, it's the most... it's not bizarre, but it's ultimate in socialist thinking. It's the great equalization.
It's funny that you mentioned Chinese because I'm really glad Dave Hodges is popping in at some point. He wrote an article back in June I want to ask him about because in part one he details how the Chinese government, under the direction of, global corporations like Goldman Sachs, they're instituting a mass relocation of their population from rural to urban. And at the point of a gun, the Chinese military is forcibly removing 1 million Chinese farmers per month from their rural homes and forcing them into this massive ghost cities from which China spent about almost something like $5 trillion to construct. So it's just very interesting. He talks about that, and he's talking about China. You look at the American and Chinese methods for depopulating rural areas. They're different, but the net effect is exactly the same. Can you imagine if the U.S. military, as is happening in China, were to forcibly relocate every American farmer to urban areas under the threat of violence from the military? I mean, they'd witness an outbreak of widespread violence.
Well, but here's the difficulty with that, Sheila, and that is that what the Chinese are trying to do, and of course the Chinese have adopted a whole new form of economy that I call state capitalism.
Yes.
And what they're trying to do is force the rural population into the urban areas as a workforce for that industrial complex of and capitalism that they're creating. Now that occurred in Europe, but it took about 300 years to occur. So we're in Europe and even in America, where you went from 80% rural population to 80% urban population today, and even more narrow than that. And you said, well, the U.S. Army took all the farmers and pushed them into the cities. Well, that would only be 2% of the total population, because only 2% of the population are actually farmers. Now, the success of the U.S. was its incredible ability for that 2% of the population to produce enough food to feed the other 98% with food left over to export. And, of course, so what China is trying to do is force a pattern, and they're not averse to making their people do that. China has always been, I mean, if you think about it, the current Chinese leadership or Mao Zedong was no different than the Chinese emperors that just simply ordered things to be done, and they were done.
Sure.
And they were done by
absolutely.
force. So there's really nothing new in that. And so it's the same difficulty that when you look at Africa and you're forcing Africa to go through in 40 or 50 years what it took Europe 300 to 400 years to go through.
Exactly.
So the idea of what's happening in China, the more troubling thing in China, and of course gives lie to this whole control of population. They bought into that many years ago, and they introduced a draconian measure of population control by allowing only one child per family. All right?
Absolutely.
And there's several effects of that. One is they said, okay, you can have a second child, but you get the child is not recognized by the government. The child gets no schooling, no pension, no nothing. The child just exists, and the parents have to pay for it. The other thing, of course, that's happened is because in China you normally wanted a son to be the oldest in the family. So you developed a whole pattern of infanticide, that if the first child born was a girl, the girl was killed. And so now you've got a huge disparity in population. The ratio of men to women in China is causing enormous social upheaval and disruptions, and will continue to do so for many decades to come.
Well, you mentioned Agenda 21, Tim, and I think that, the United States is totally steamrolling towards a complete Agenda 21 style of total urbanization. I mean, it's already commenced, and I mean, everybody knows it began almost 3 decades ago. It's they want you stacked and packed in little green cities. They want to tax you for breathing. They want you riding your bike. They want to get rid of all private land ownership. I mean, there's so many layers to this Agenda 21, and people have to understand. Go look at your city hall, or go look at your, go talk to your rural development planner. This is everywhere. I actually went on, I was just randomly checking different state rural planning, and even in Canada, I jumped on City of Montreal's website. It says right on it, Agenda 21, Implementation of Sustainable Development. I mean, this is, in fact, the 21st century agenda to complete global totalitarianism, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. And when you read, here's Agenda 21, Section 3.1 in Bureaucraties. The Rio Declaration on Environment and Development and Agenda 21, adopted by the international community at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, call for patterns of development that reflect the new understanding of these and other intersectoral links. There is also general agreement that unsustainable consumption and production patterns are contributing to the unsustainable use of natural resources and environmental degradation, as well as to the reinforcement of social inequities and of poverty, with the above-mentioned consequences for demographic patterns. So what they've built into there, that's pure Club of Rome stuff.
Sure,
and when they say intersectoral linkages, and it's like they don't talk about the future children, they talk about intergenerational disparities.
But world population, I mean, by all intents and purposes, it's completely out of control. And I mean, we know that plans are underway now, implemented by the New World Order elite, to depopulate our planet of about, like I said, 6 to 7 billion people to a manageable level of about anywhere they throw out figures between 200 and 500 million. Full-scale depopulation procedures have been implemented as population reduction, vaccinations, geoengineering, land grabs, criminal banking scams, all this rules the populace, and I really get a kick out of this. While the global elite construct underground bunkers, eat organic, and hoard seeds in Arctic vaults, the global poor are being slowly starved, thanks to high commodity prices, and poisoned with, GMO. I mean, austerity measures aimed largely at the poor are being imposed on all the nations of the world. And, weather events grow more deadly, and, look at these, it's amazing. 1957, President Dwight Eisenhower, who later warned of a military-industrial complex, commissions a panel of these scientists to study the issue of overpopulation. Isn't that interesting that he was even doing that? And back then they were advocating both the release of deadly viruses and perpetual warfare as a means to decrease world population.
Well, of course, the population issue it is one of those things that people get very emotional about. They get emotional about water. They get emotional about their children or their grandchildren. They get emotional about their space.
Sure.
We may be gregarious creatures. That is, we like to congregate together, but we defend our space. Robert Ardrey wrote about this in The Social Contract. And of course, you see all of these things. It's like the whole Dave Broadfoot, the Canadian comedian's comment that a Canadian was an immigrant with seniority. But what I've said is that those immigrants have all got the mentality of, I'm in, close the door, and you see you see these sorts of debates going on in the U.S. now with the whole immigration pattern. A lot of the people that are debating it are saying, no, we are for immigration. We're just not for illegal or for uncontrolled immigration, and that's a reasonable argument. But this idea of how many people can live on a particular piece of land, or how much land or people the land can support, has been discussed right back. Confucius was talking about this. It's basically called the carrying capacity. The Greeks were talking about it 2,000 years ago, and they developed a phrase called ecumen, E-C-U-M-E-N-E, and non-ecumen. Ecumen was land that could support a population. Non-ecumen was land that couldn't support people. And so they started dividing the world up into those areas even then. And then, of course, Montesquieu and in the French philosopher looking at these kinds of patterns, and then, of course, Malthus we've already talked about. But when we talk, and then Paul Ehrlich comes in with his population bomb, and he was predicting world populations. I noticed Gates only quoted 9 billion. When Ehrlich was around, I remember the figures were 24, even up to 30 billion. But the problem is, the world can carry far more people than it currently does. The world
and it's interesting, and it's interesting because it's so fascinating to me that when you look at the fact that Agenda 21, and people can go and look this up, go get a copy of Agenda 21. Don't take our word for it. It calls for dramatically increasing urbanization and forcing populations out of rural areas. And again, populated stack and pack micro apartments controlled by technocrats, with the ability to control every aspect of your life. I mean, when this is completed, this lifestyle will be hell on earth. It'll look more like, George Orwell's 1984 can't compare to the horror of what's to come with this sinister Agenda 21. And I think people seriously need to wake up, Tim, because, my God, full-scale depopulation procedures, they've been implemented from, you look at Ford, you look at Dwight Eisenhower, and then it dovetails really nicely on the fact that this is a proven fact that Rockefellers own almost 90% of the complete pharmaceutical industry. Well, isn't that convenient that, we've got 75 to 80% of our population's hopped up on some kind of drug, and it ties in with the health care. We're getting bombarded 100 ways on every side of us.
Well, the whole, when I was talking about the concept of carrying capacity, and I said the world isn't overpopulated. When we go back to Malthus and him claiming that the world would outgrow the food supply, all of that, of course, is built around, as is so much of their current arguments, business as usual. But business never is as usual. That we're constantly creating new ideas, understanding new things, dealing with different issues, and right now I talked about the increase in food supply. People forget that before the Industrial Revolution, there was an agricultural revolution, and the capacity to produce food has just absolutely gone through the roof. This year, they're talking about growth in food production worldwide, and you've got to remember, in the U.S., farmers are being paid under a bill brought in, the Agricultural Act that George Bush brought in, where farmers were being paid not to farm, not to grow crops, because the prices were wrong and so on. And so if you want to start talking about government interference and creating false ideas, there it is.
Well, Tim, explain to people like Thomas Robert Malthus. Really, Malthus was one of the first, economists to propose a systematic theory of population, but you read me a staggering, I think it was in the essay, The Principle of Population or something. I can't remember what the book was from, but if you happen to have that quote handy, read that quote, because people have to understand that, based on any of Malthus' work, you look at, he's saying that human populations grow exponentially, basically doubling with each cycle, and the way he was predicting things, he was saying there was likely to be something like, how many how many billion people by even the end of, the end of 2000?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I don't have the quote in front of me, but yeah, it's Malthus wrote an essay. It was an essay of about 36 pages in which he said he assumed that food production would increase linearly in a straight line, but population increased geometrically, that is exponentially, as you said, so that the population is doubling every time, whereas food is only increasing by a unit of one each time, and therefore one would outgrow the other. But that's been proven to be absolutely wrong. I mean, to get around to talking about it right now, the world produces enough food every year to feed 26 billion people. So we're not even close. The big problem, and it's not really a problem because it's just that we haven't really addressed it. We were addressing it, but the environmentalists got in the way. The big issue is the ability to store the food and the ability to distribute the food. And those are two mechanisms. One we were dealing with when we brought in CFCs for better refrigeration and an inert gas that replaced the ammonia that was so expensive and problematic. But what did they do? They said, these CFCs, we got to cut that out. We can't allow refrigeration. Well, when you look at countries like China and India, 60% of all the food they produce never makes it to the table. Even in North America, 30% of all the food the farmers produce doesn't make it to the table. But we've reduced it from 60 down to 30, mostly by refrigeration. But what did we do? We said, you can't have CFCs, and we're going to ban them completely. And China and India said, well, why don't you bring your level down? Let us use the CFCs to bring our food storage capacity up. And we said no. So India and China said, fine, we're not going to be part of the Montreal Protocol on on CFC control. So it was another one of those imposing our views and our values on other countries. But the other issue, of course, is the one of equitable distribution of the food. And we're just starting to develop world markets. John Kennedy he was a big promoter of the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, which was an attempt to improve the markets and open up world markets and get greater distribution of food. And you can see that working, but of course they try to block it. Another example of where the environmentalists stepped in to limit our ability to store food and preserve food. And by the way, we've done that through history. The whole spice trade was built around the idea that it could make food last much longer and be more palatable when you cooked it. That was another part of conservation of food. But we've experimented. In fact, I work with a guy by the name of Ben Burke, and people at the Pinawa nuclear facility in Manitoba, where they were working with irradiating food in order to preserve them. If you can produce irradiated food whose shelf life is virtually forever.
Oh, here we go, Tim. I finally found that quote. So this is what Thomas Malthus says. Population, when unchecked, goes on doubling itself every 25 years or increases in a geometrical ratio. And he also said, which is really interesting, he said, the constant effort towards population, which is found even in the most vicious societies, increases the number of people before the means of subsistence are increased. So, again, and he's got another quote that says, really interesting, the rich by unfair combinations contribute frequently to prolong a season of distress among the poor. So it's interesting all the quotes this man had, isn't it? It's actually quite spooky.
But of course, Malthus was actually a minister of the church. And of course, in England, those church ministers were given great big houses called manses. To buy the best houses you can buy in England today are old vicarages, and he sat there twiddling his thumbs and coming up with the ideas and the words that he uses. A vicious population. Of course, that's those primitive, uneducated, unbaptized people. I mean, the prejudices in his ideas and his work are just laced in his language. And it's almost the same. it's almost the same as the arrogance in this quote from David Suzuki, the Canadian environmentalist. He said, economics is a very species chauvinistic idea. No other species on Earth, and there are maybe 30 million of them, and he's got that wrong, has had the nerve to put forth a concept called economics, in which one species, us, declares the right to put value on everything else on Earth in the living and non-living world. Well, of course,
wow.
Yeah. Well, there's no
and
other
this is also, and don't forget, people, that David Suzuki has been working for a lot of years with the likes of Al Gore and his cronies to try to bring in this complete, it's not global warming, it's global governance, and it's really about, environmentalism really is a new age religion that they're trying to bring in, and they're trying to phase out fundamental Christianity, all in the nice guise of don't step on that rock, you pleb, because that rock has more life value than you. And I mean, look at Barry. I was going to say Barry Soetoro, Obama's science czar there, John Holdren. He was, some of his books too. Eco science, population, resources, environment. I mean, he's outlining all these imminent catastrophic overpopulation things, basically man is causing complete global misery, and then they offer up all these sorts of green solutions in order to help prevent these horrific global scenarios like Al Gore and the Suzukis are always saying, and then they get into food distribution and forced sterilizations, forced vaccinations. I mean, this is right out of a sci-fi horror this guy's writing. Well, and this was the science advisor? Oh,
yeah, he's the science czar for Obama. Well, I'll tell you a couple of stories about Mr. Holdren. He co-authored the book Ecoscience, Population, Resources, and Environment with Paul Ehrlich and Ann Ehrlich, and of course Paul Ehrlich made all sorts of projections about what was going to happen. For example, he projected that Britain would be virtually gone by the year 2000.
Sure.
His predictions are so ridiculous and so wrong that's it incredible that he's got any credibility at all. And Holdren, in that book, here's some of the things that he listed. He wrote that women could be forced to abort their pregnancies whether they wanted to or not. The population at large could be sterilized by infertility drugs intentionally put into the nation's drinking water or in food. Single mothers and teen mothers should have their babies seized from them against their will and given away to other couples to raise. People who contribute to social deterioration can be required by law to exercise reproductive responsibility. I guess that's those vicious people that Malthus was talking about.
That is spooky.
Right?
Tell our listeners, Tim, where people can actually go look that up.
Well, the abbreviation of Holdren's works are on a site called Zombie Time, ZOMBIE Time. That's all one word, zombietime.com. And it's / John Holdren. But you just
but I mean, look at all these creepy quotes. I mean, look at old good old Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. He says, if I were reincarnated, I'd like to come back to the earth as a killer virus to lower human population levels. I mean, people have to understand that, these are all methods, primarily through whatever it is, but they want to create massive hunger, starvation, famine worldwide. And again, like you just talked about, all these infectious diseases. Well, Mr. Eugenics himself, Bill Gates, he's got a perfectly simple solution. It's, get rid of the whole widespread infectious disease, which leads to global pandemic and plague and pestilence at an unprecedented scale. Let's just sterilize, vaccinate, and look at Bill Gates' connections with Monsanto. So they're using this buildup of and use of nuclear, chemical, biological agents, the poisoning and contamination of our entire food and water, the introduction and use of even imposed deadly pharmaceutical drugs, and, all these weather modifications, whether they're triggering earthquakes, tsunamis through electromagnetic, psychotronic weapons, they've got them. These things exist. And then you've got all these deadly vaccinations, forced sterilizations. I mean, like you said, we go back to China where there's forced vaccinations, abortions, euthanasia. It's just unbelievably. And here's the thing, death and the management of who lives and dies has become the central organized principle of the 21st century. I mean, it's unbelievable.
But Sheila, that's going to happen if you get rid of God. You got to play God. You got to think you're God.
That's right.
And you act like you can do whatever you want, and it's your job to do it. It's your job to play God and manage the planet.
Well, Tim, people say the previous century has been by far the bloodiest in human history, but you look at hunger, famine, disease. They took billions of innocent lives, quote unquote. World Wars I and II, along with the regimes of Mao Zedong. You talked about Stalin, Hitler. Even Bush. They took hundreds of millions. I mean, the 21st century is shaping up to really accelerate this dismal trend where hunger, famine, disease. I mean, my God, when you take a look at everything, like I said, we're bombarded by things on every single side of us, and it gets hard to put it all into perspective.
Yeah, but here's the difficulty with that. You see, Malthus said that the natural controls of population were disease and wars and famines and so on, and that what we were doing was eliminating those by progress. We were getting rid of those, and that he saw that there was going to be, therefore, a need to counteract that. And, of course, that's what these people are talking about. I mean, just a couple of quotes here. And people won't be surprised from this. This is Ingrid Newkirk, who was a leader of the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. She said, mankind is a cancer. We're the biggest blight on the face of the earth. If you haven't given voluntary human extinction much thought before, voluntary human extinction, kill yourself. The idea of a world with no people in it may seem strange, but if you give it a chance, I think you might agree that the extinction of Homo sapiens would mean survival for millions, if not billions, of Earth-dwelling species. Phasing out the human race will solve every problem on Earth, social and environmental. Well, once you got no humans, what is there? Those animals you leave behind are not even aware of their own existence. And they're not able to create disciplines like economics, as our friend Suzuki would say. So it's just ludicrous. But if you think that she's alone in that view, here's Richard Conniff, Conniff, writing in Audubon, which is one of the sort of environmental magazines. He said, among environmentalists sharing 2 or 3 beers, the notion is quite common that if only some calamity could wipe out the entire human race, other species might once again have a chance. And, of course, that's where you see that fool, Prince Philip, getting his ideas about the virus. And by the way, if he were to come back, be reincarnated as a virus, I would hope that the first group of people he would eliminate would be monarchs and monarchy.
The royal bloodlines, and get rid of a couple Rothschild family and Rockefellers, and maybe Kissinger could go, and Ted Turner and Bill Gates. There's my list.
Well, okay, but you can make your list, but you notice that everybody's list includes other people, not themselves. It's like I hear this all the time, and I talk to groups like farmers and say, well, they're saying there's problems with chemicals and there's this and that and the other. And the farmers will say, yeah, we agree, but we need to clean up. But, my neighbor, start with my neighbor. Don't start with me. It's always
hey, Tim, I got to tell you this here. I knew this UN report I'm looking at here. It concludes that the Earth population will hit 7.8 billion people by next month, and by the next century could top as close as 18 billion. I mean, this follows lockstep with globalist plans. So this raw story reports that so they're talking about 10.9 billion by not even 2019, with most of the growth a result of high birth rates in the developing world. The United Nations is saying this. The latest world population prospects report that next century could be as high as 16.6 billion, depending on what statistical model they're using. And anyway, in either case, the population in the world's poorest region is anticipated to, they use the phrasing, rise dramatically, and the number of inhabitants in the world's least developed countries is projected to double from 898 million to 1.9 billion in just 2045. Well, where have we heard that number before? But anyway, it's amazing to me. Amazing that they...
Yeah, but okay, first of all, you mentioned at the beginning of the program that Ted Turner gave $1 billion to the United Nations. What are they going to put forward? Tim Wirth.
He's the highest.
He's
the highest single contributor to the UN. Ted Turner is, and anybody can check that out.
Yeah, and of course
amazing?
he gets a tax write-off on that, and you probably find that it reduced his taxable income significantly, and they can all play that game. But Tim Wirth was the senator that arranged for Hansen and the beginning of the whole global warming hoax before the U.S. Congress in 1988. He went on to become a director at the United Nations. And when Maurice Strong was asked by Elaine Dewar, the reporter, speaking to him about what he was doing, and he said, we've got to shut down the industrialized nations. We've got to save the planet. And she said, well, why don't you run for politics? And he said, you can't do anything as a politician. And she said, well, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to go to the UN where I can get all the money I want. Go to the UN, get all the money I want, and not be accountable to anybody. And that's precisely what has happened. That is precisely what he's done.
Well, and Kissinger just wrote in a report last month that, well, it's funny, Kissinger even wrote in a report that I found online last month that, globalists are on schedule, they're on track with their depopulation agenda, and you go look at monuments such as the Georgia Guidestones attest to this. And we're now seeing, look at the North American Union ramping up into full swing as per their plan. You've got these FEMA camps ready to rock. These are mass graves that have been readied across the United States. This is not tinfoil hat conspiracy theory things. This is, people, go do your own independent research on this. This is a fact. There's water and food shortages on the horizon. I'm sure Dave Hodges will speak to that. He's got amazing intel. These guys, the elite globalist totalitarians' plans are coming to a head. So, because if you really look...
Okay,
go ahead,
here's the thing. Here's the thing, Sheila. All of the predictions about world population have been wrong. All of them.
Yes.
And particularly the ones made by Paul Ehrlich and John Holdren. And Holdren, by the way, was teaching at Harvard, and he organized. They had breakfast meetings there, and there were two scientists by the name of Willie Soon and Sally Baliunas, who had done tremendous research proving that the world was warmer 1,000 years ago in the medieval warm period. In other words, in complete contradiction to the hockey stick, that phony bit of climate science that was produced by the Michael. Yeah, okay, and so they not only had to eliminate that medieval warm period, but they had to also attack the people that were proving that it existed. And so Holdren arranged a breakfast meeting with academics at Harvard where the attacks on Soon and Baliunas were just frightening. Now, I've known Sally Baliunas for about 25, 30 years, and she used to work with us and doing tremendous work. We were doing work, for example, on the role of ergot poisoning in grain and causing hallucinations that are clearly related to women being blamed because they got the worst grain and they got fungus poisoning, and the symptoms are identical to witchcraft. But beyond that, both Willie and Sally are astrophysicists, solar physicists.
Yes, from Harvard.
Sally, the attacks on Sally was working with us. She was on our board at the Friends of Science that we set up in Calgary, where we were looking at the science of climate change, and all of a sudden we didn't hear from her at all. We couldn't contact her. She just disappeared off the face of the earth.
Wow.
Well, we later found out that the attacks that she was subjected to at that breakfast meeting that Holdren organized, and by the way, we know he organized it because in the leaked emails from East Anglia, he bragged. He wrote to Michael Mann and the gang and said, you guys will get a kick out of this, about how we took down Willie Soon and Sally Baliunas. And I've talked to Sally since, and the attacks that she was subjected to as a woman and as a redhead, it's truly, truly disturbing. And yet here he is, the science czar for the Obama administration. But as I said, all of the predictions these people have made have been absolutely wrong. And one of the reasons they're wrong is because the population dynamics and statistics are being grossly distorted. What is not being told the public, and I've written about it, and it is very available in the literature, all you have to do is type in or Google in or whatever, Bing in, whatever you want, demographic transition. Okay? Now, this was research that was being done in the 60s. It was first done in Sweden, where the pattern was being shown. And basically what it is that people have a lot of children because of the infant mortality rate.
Right.
All right? And so when you get when you have 8 or 9 children, and you know that 4 or 5 or 6 of them are going to die, and you know that your children are your pension plan. Your children are the ones that are going to look after you in old age. So you want to make sure you have children that survive. And so that was the reason that people had large families. And ironically, one of the worst things that could happen to a family was to have all the children survive, because it happened to Oliver Cromwell, the fellow that killed Charles I and took over in England. His family, there were 9 children, all of them survived, so there wasn't enough land and property for all of them to get some. So I've argued that he was so mad he took over the whole of England. But this idea about the size of families is directly related to the mortality rate. Well, of course, with medicine, with improvements in nutrition, and of course the controlling of childbirth fever, it started to drop. And by the way, if readers want to, or listeners, I should say, want to read a magnificent book that speaks to this, it's called The Weaker Vessel, and it's by Antonia Fraser. And Antonia Fraser is an English historian. She's written about monarchy and so on, but she was writing about Charles I and Oliver Cromwell and Charles II and so on, and she realized after a while that she had a whole amount of research on women's lives in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. And she started to put this together and came up with an absolutely amazing picture. Now, the term "the weaker vessel" was the term given to women in those centuries. Okay, they were seen as the weaker vessel, that they didn't survive very long. Most of them died in childbirth. Most children died in childbirth. And in that book, The Weaker Vessel, for example, and it wasn't just the poor people. It was.
She was really looking at how the women of the Civil War era, what they could expect beyond marriage and childbirth in an age where, infant and maternal mortality was very frequent and contraception really unknown.
Well, they did have some forms of contraception. Condoms were made out of sheep's guts and stuff like that. But, of course, the men didn't want to use them any more than they do today in Africa. But the thing is that, or even in the Western world for that matter, but the thing is, the average woman had 21 confinements in her lifetime. That's 21 pregnancies in their lifetime. Queen Anne had 19 children. She outlived all of them. All of them. We can't even imagine these kind of statistics. And Fraser talks about in the book how a girl would be born. They baptized them as quickly as they could, because they knew if they didn't and they died, they wouldn't go to heaven. They'd have the mortal sin. And they would name the girl, let's say Mary. Well, then if Mary died, then the next girl that was born got the name Mary, and they kept calling the girls Mary until one of the children lived. And so when you start to read about this in England in the 17th and 18th century, you start to understand where Malthus is coming from and where Malthus is wrong, but also where we've got to start looking at what's happened in the 19th century. Now, one of the big things was, of course, a doctor by the name of Semmelweis, who discovered childbirth fever, puerperal fever, and this just shows you how weird things are. He had 2 wards of 2 maternity wards, and they were run by nuns, as most hospitals were. The churches were running them in those days. And he noticed that in one of the wards, there were much fewer childbirth deaths and women dying than in the other one. So he studied it. He did a scientific study. He decided that what made the difference was that in one of the wards that had the lower death rates, the nun rang a bell. Once a day she rang a bell. And he decided that it was the ringing of the bell that was making the difference. Now, before you think that's crazy, you got to remember that when they had the plagues going through, they believed that ringing bells got rid of the plague as well. So that's where he got that idea from. He found out, it was shown that he was wrong. He went back and re-examined it, and guess what he discovered? He discovered that when the nun rang the bell, all the women on that ward had to go and wash themselves, had to wash their hands. And of course, that was the key of cleanliness in childbirth that prevented so many of those deaths. So when we start to look at that kind of thing, now what happens with the demographic transition is, as a nation improves its economy and can start to deal with things like pension plans and retirement plans, and not worry that you're going to lose 4 out of 7 children that are born. Then you start to have less children, and the birth rate declines. And you got two things going on. One is the death rate declines, and the second thing is the birth rate declines. But before the birth rate declines, the death rate declines, and the population starts to go up. Then when the birth rate goes down, the population starts to decline, and then it levels off. That's the demographic transition. And of course, what it proves is that with better health care, with a vibrant economy, a strong economy, with good development, then you get a decline in the population. Now, this pattern is hitting many countries of the world. Italy, for a long time now, has had a standing offer of paying a couple to have a third child, because if you have less than 2.4 children per family on average, the population rate is going to go down. You're going to have a declining population. So you need a minimum of 2.4 for a replacement rate. Okay? Right. Now, you look at countries like Japan, where their birth rate is down to 1.3 children per family.
1.3, yeah, that's right.
They're not even replacing the population, and so what you've got happening in Japan is the population getting older and older, fewer and fewer young people. So their whole social structure is collapsing because there aren't enough young people to pay into the pension plans and the health care plans to maintain the aging population. Now, that's going on in Italy, as I said. It's occurring in Quebec, in Canada.
So let's think about that, and let's take a macro view of that. So you've got these, very staggeringly low numbers of population that can't really sustain, the future. Then you throw that together with, Kissinger is telling everybody as recently as last week to, be that U.S. citizens and even people in the world should accept food rationing, because, he's saying basically that he's predicting a series of contrived famines, and, they're creating these mandatory programs that make this exclusive reliance on birth control. And, so it's a modern-day application of eugenics in a scheme that allows Henry and his cronies to have their cake and eat it too, because that world would finally be rid of, then all the useless eaters would be ridden. And then, so when you take a macro view again, you step back, you look at the fact that, we've got, think about this for a second. My God, when you really step back, as our world sits today, Tim, many of the things that surround us in life, let's face it, they're poisonous. Our air, our water, our food, the vaccine, and on a social front,
I'd be very leery about that kind of statement, Sheila, because you see, all of these things, all of these scares are what they want you to believe. That's how they control you with fear. It's the same way as the market. Fear and greed are what control it. What controls the way that Ted Turner operates is fear and greed. He knows if he can frighten the people, then he can fill his greed. And then he can say,
sure, but where do you find the balance, Tim, between the fact that there are these corporate demons like Monsanto we know they're poisoning the food. You know there's issues with our air. We don't know they're poisoning the food. In Canada, just like I don't know about the U.S., but I imagine the statistics are the same. The number of people that had died of food poisoning last year, almost all of them. In fact, I know one year, about 5 years ago, all of them was because of improper storage of the food, right? Not lack of refrigeration, and so ptomaine and things like that, or improper cooking of the food. And when you look at the biggest cause of food poisoning in North America now comes from the organic food. You can even get E. coli in organic lettuce. It grows in the organic lettuce. But they never tell you about that. They never say, "Oh, well, this was organic food that caused this outbreak." Most of the food we eat is incredibly safe, unbelievably safe. We've never had food so safe. And then when you talk about genetically modified food, well, we've always genetically modified plants and animals. We called it plant breeding. We called it animal breeding. But what we did in the old days, and we started doing this 9,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, where modern agriculture began, we would breed plants and breed animals for particular characteristics. But in doing that, you transferred whole blocks of genes. You transferred genes that you didn't even know you were transferring, and that you didn't realize the damage you'd done until suddenly the environmental conditions changed. I remember, for example, back in the 40s and 50s, there was a problem with the wheat being too long in the straw, so they wanted a shorter wheat, and so they bred for that. And then they discovered that it eliminated a gene that was protecting the plant from other problems. But with genetic modification, so plant breeding is like doing surgery with a chainsaw. Genetic modification is like doing surgery with a laser, because you can actually take individual genes and transfer them, and you could put in what are called trigger genes to turn those genes on and off when it's safe to do so. So, there are side effects, there are dangers in every single thing you do, but when you start to get proper analysis, proper understanding of the risks, the benefits, then you start to see that everything's a two-edged sword and you have to make a judgment. But certainly with genetic modification, all of the things against it, and you've got to remember, what's the source of all of this information? Who are the people that are putting this stuff out? And just to flip back to, by the way, the population and the demographic transition thing, one of the ways that they're masking what's happening is that the countries that are offsetting their declining population by immigration. Canada's got a very cynical policy where we say, okay, what's our birth rate of Canadians within Canadians? Well, then we'll allow so many people into the country to make sure that doesn't have a declining effect. And then we even more cynically, we say, well, we'll only take people that are fully educated and fully qualified. We're going to jump on a break, Tim. Hopefully when we come back from the break, Dave Hodges will join us. But, I mean, just think of this before we go to the break. I mean, you've got Mayor Bloomberg, and he actually quoted this. I have a YouTube video I'll post on the Freedomizer chat that he says, I will determine what and how much you may drink and eat. I mean, and look at him and Michelle Obama. They've been trying to control the size of sodas, amount of salt, dictating what children, school kids can eat for lunch. They're totally conditioning the American public that the government controls on all food intake. And with the stroke of a pen, Obama has total and absolute control over all food, where his EO states food resources means all commodities and products, simple, mixed, or compound. They go on to say what it is and the processing of raw commodity. Obama, at the stroke of a pen, he has basic, production, processing, distribution, storage, you name it. This is domestic distribution of farm equipment, fertilizer, you name it. This man has control. So anyway, we'll hop on a break, and then hopefully when we come back on the other side, we will have the one and only Dave Hodges on the show.
Get ready for the epic new documentary adventure ride of your life. Shade, the motion picture. Hub you into the globalist domain and embellish a Burmese film.
Nothing in this world works the way you think it does. Nothing. Governments do not operate the way you think they do. Banks do not do what you think they do. The police department is not here for what you think it is. Nothing in your world works the way you think it does.
We have to let them know that their world government has been identified, and they thought they'd include the world economy to bring in a worldwide police state, but instead it's going to bring them down.
You have to stand up, speak out.
Shade, the motion picture. Order your copy of the DVD today at shadethemotionpicture.com. You know the Constitution like the back of your hand. You've read books, listened to podcasts, attended lectures, surfed websites, and watched videos. You've made liberty your life's goal, but something seems to be missing. Stickers from LibertyStickers.com. Exercise your freedom of speech with the world's most dangerous bumper stickers. That's LibertyStickers.com. But wait, there's more. You can buy Liberty Stickers wholesale. Get them for 99 cents each when you put 100 or more in your shopping cart in any combination. Sell them or give them away. They're great for gun shows, flea markets, fairs, outreach, and more. Earn extra money, promote freedom, and spread the word. Need custom stickers, labels, or decals for your organization or business? Liberty Stickers makes them. Go to LibertyStickers.com to order or call 877-873-9626. LibertyStickers.com, the world's most dangerous stickers.
Vaccines are required for students, employees, immigrants, military members, and international travel. Do you know how to legally avoid them? This is vaccine rights attorney and Freedomizer radio host Alan Phillips. My vaccine exemption ebook can help you avoid the mistakes that have cost others their exemption rights. Get the authoritative guide to vaccine legal exemptions, an ebook available at freedomizerradio.com and vaccinerights.com.
Let freedom ring throughout the land.
We're here.
Welcome back to The Antidote. We're in the last half an hour of the program, and I would like to welcome you, as I promised our listeners. It's the one and only Dave Hodges from the Common Sense Show. Welcome to the program, Dave.
Well, I'm glad to be here. My mom was thankful that I was the one and only, so nice to be with you.
The one and only, hey. So today on the program, and I just wanted to let you know that, Dave, you wrote a really interesting article back in, I want to say June. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But you did write a very interesting article in which Alex Jones ran, as well as Drudge Report carried it. And you were really talking about, depopulation, especially in the rural urban areas, correct?
Yes.
So I'll let you just weigh in on our depopulation discussion, but at the same time, it was really interesting, and you might have missed this, but I just want you to hear good old, it's only a 15-second clip. Let's play this for the listeners again. Listen to Ted Turner.
To stabilize the population. When I was born, there was
what's wrong with the population? I mean,
there were too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff.
And then now we're just going to quickly listen to Bill Gates and his idea of what he can do.
Look, first we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase.
Isn't that crazy? If we do a really good job, we can lower that by about 15% on vaccinations, health. Wow. Right out of the mouth of Mr. Gates and Mr. Turner. So weigh in on this, Dave.
Well, I think they should volunteer to go first. Let's give them front of the line. And I too many people are using too much stuff. Yeah, I wonder how much Ted Turner, how much stuff he uses on a daily basis.
His carbon footprint's fairly big.
Yeah, let's start with shut down CNN, the Communist News Network. They use too much energy. So anyway, serious answer to your question, yes, I did write a series on depopulation. Yeah, I didn't know it was on Alex Jones and Drudge. I guess I should read more often. But you know what led me to write the series was I came across some stuff that said that the Chinese government was forcibly moving 1 million farmer peasants into these ghost cities a month. 1 million a month, and they were doing this at the end of the barrel. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I started reading it, and I started finding some familiar names who were quoting this program, such as Hank Paulson, the father of the bailouts, ex-Goldman Sachs, ex-Treasury Secretary, and then Bill Gates was putting his name behind this, George Soros. And I thought, oh, there's something here. And I started thinking in my paranoid mindset that what they're doing in China, they might someday do here. So I started looking, and I came across a guy who's been a good friend of the president. He was his mentor when the president was just an activist and not a politician, and his name was Mike Kulig. And he is the father of the program Build One America. And this program is all about getting people out of the suburbs and into the stack and pack coffin apartments in the inner cities. And the way that they're going to do it, and they've already started, Sheila, and I kid you not, they started in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and they take regional taxes from different cities, different counties, and they regionalize the collection into one pot, and then they spend that pot in the inner city, and they're trying to force people out of the suburb into the inner city to receive any kind of services. And I thought, my goodness, we are following a line. And then, of course, we all know about the rural aspects of depopulation when, essentially the bank combined with the government and the SWAT team raids on the farmers and the EPA regulations on their farms, that they're basically doing their best to get farmers off their land, so the only remaining farmers someday will be the corporatized farmers, the large collectives. So that's what basically led me to write that series.
Well, it's so interesting you're mentioning Hank Paulson and these other globalists. So basically they're, doing this mass relocation of Chinese farmers and really under the guise that it's necessary to fuel the Chinese economy, correct?
Well, here's what they said, and it was total nonsense, and I pointed this out in the article. They said that we're only moving the people there to the cities because there'll be jobs for them. Wait a minute. Jobs don't come out of thin air and then the people come. The people come, and then that creates an economy, which creates a need for jobs. And they had it backwards. And, of course, everything they were saying was a lie. It's all about centralization of population under Agenda 21.
Sure. Well,
by the way, Dave,
weigh in on that, Tim.
Yeah, well, the whole point about the suburbs has been a major theme of Obama's right from the start. And as you said, David, that Mike Kruglich is behind it. And of course, one of the reasons was that people in the suburbs were voting against the left and against Obama. And that was part of that drive. But the other thing is that the suburbs have always been seen as the evil sign of capitalism. That you moved out there and you built your big house and you had your big garden plot and you had your big car to commute back and forth, and that you then abandoned the inner city, and so that whole urban abandonment was part of the theme that Obama was driving in his social work. The anti-suburbs is very much a part of that. Ironically, of course, the growth of the suburbs was really a major cause of faux urban warming, because the weather stations were built at airports outside the city. Then the cities grew out around the airport, and the heat from the city caused the temperature records to go up, which made it look like the Earth was warming, but in fact it was something we call the urban heat island effect. So you get all of these bizarre things going on. But, yeah, the suburbs has always been a focus for Obama.
Well, and Dave, touch on the fact that you were talking about, basically death by 1,000 cuts, also speaking of farming, about American farmers. you're basically saying, if it's not the EPA enforcing its Agenda 21 wetlands regulations with those devastating consequences, on the farmers, it's the FDA harassing them, it's, Congress plotting new attacks at every angle. Weigh in on that. I mean, whether it's China or the U.S., Agenda 21 urbanization policies, like you always say, they're designed for herding these people into these stacked and packed green cities. These are primary method of controls about, controlling food production and land ownership. Weigh in on that, Dave.
Well, there's no question that they want us in the stack and packs, and that's going to be what we're talking about here is going to be the peaceful, civilized way that they do it. The unpeaceful way they're going to do it, and I did talk about this in these particular articles that I wrote that you're referencing, but I did write about this in another set of articles I wrote. On the peaceful side, we get the forced relocation, the economically mandated relocation, but there's also what's behind a gun and we're going to drive you out, create false flags around the country or whatever crisis you want to invent, and have an excuse to move people to centralized areas as way stations, and then you move them into the stack and packs and they have no say about it. Let me give you an example of why I can say this and say it with authority. Back in September, Simon Properties, the largest owner of malls and shopping centers in North America, signed an exclusive agreement with Homeland Security that essentially said that in times of declared emergency on the part of the president, that they will open up their malls and strip centers for population relocation centers. And then very quickly, the NFL, the NBA, and the other major sports franchises said, we'll do the same thing with our stadiums and our arenas. So you already have a plan that's been put out there that's under the jurisdiction of Homeland Security for forcible relocation in some kind of contrived emergency situation. So I don't think we're just going to see a peaceful, hey, come on over here, it's economically feasible, you can't live in the suburbs or your farms anymore because you can't afford it. I think there's going to be some coercion involved too. And I look at this as a two-edged sword that'll be enacted simultaneously.
Well, do you think people? Go ahead. Just hold on one sec, Tim. I mean, Dave, touch on just one idea, because I know one of your articles. You throw the question out there at the American people. Do you really think that you and your family are actually safe from the ravages of depopulation? Particularly through economic blackmail, starvation. Hammering away on the farmers. I mean, you say think again, because I really do think, Dave, that they're actively plotting to get people out of the suburbs and into these really densely populated urban areas. I mean, and again, you've exposed a lot of things with Agenda 21, but touch on the things that people really have to know here, Dave, in terms of, what is information that is really crucial, and what can our listeners do when it comes to all, like I told Tim earlier in the program, you look at what's going on, we're getting hit from 100 sides between, depopulation agendas and globalization plots and, these clandestine oligarchs that are ushering in this complete totalitarianism, chemtrails, GMOs, vaccinations, deadly viruses. I mean, we really are getting hammered on every side, and there is a soft kill, I really think, going on. Just touch on that, Dave.
Well, you just hit the third leg of what I was going to talk about. You're exactly right about the soft kill. Let's talk about the chemtrails and the aluminum, the barium, and so forth that's falling in the skies, and we're seeing record rates of cancer and Alzheimer's disease. Let's talk about the GMOs and record rates of obesity that lead to cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. I mean, I could go on and on. The fluoride in the water, everything essentially that's under the control of the globalists right now has a deadly soft kill aspect to it, and it's the third leg of this. So they're not attacking us just on one front. They're attacking us in waves. So you're exactly right, and these are soft kill depopulation methods. But it's interesting, and I may have to write another article on this. I've exposed this when I wrote my 7-part Gulf oil explosion series, where I detailed how this was not an accident, it was a money-making endeavor, and I exposed some other side agendas, including the president making $85 million off Gulf oil explosion through Vanguard 1 and Vanguard 2. But what's interesting about what's happening in the Gulf, the health effects there are systemic and long-term. We have seen the same things happen before with regard to what happened with the Exxon Valdez workers. And the Exxon Valdez workers live 25 to 30% below expected life expectancies, and we're going to see the same thing in the Gulf. This is a massive depopulation event in the Gulf that's affecting 40 million people. I've had Kendra Arneson on my show several times. She used to be what I dubbed the Aaron Brockovich of the Gulf, and she told me that her daughter's elementary school, there is no one that's not sick. I mean no one. And she lives in Plaquemines Parish. So we're seeing these kind of depopulation schemes being enacted. So you're exactly right about the soft kill.
So here's a question, Dave. Tim and I talked about this earlier before we jumped on a break, and I think this is really important. So, without creating, because as you know, H.L. Mencken had a great quote about, they send us running around looking for all these imaginary hobgoblins, most of them contrived, and so here's the thing, because they always like to throw out the solution after they create the problem, these globalists. So here's two questions to pose to you, Tim and Dave. Number one, how do people that are listening, especially people that are going, oh my God, this is a nightmare, how do we, proactively do something about this? Because again, I always say people are in their dystopic trance. They don't, it's a dumbed down population that they seem to be in complete complacency, and they just shrug while Rome burns around us. So how do we, number one, how do we approach this, Dave and Tim, and without creating a complete fear, because there's enough fear that they already create. So talk about that, boys.
Well, let's see if there's 10 million people, let's say, for the sake of argument, that are aware of what's going on. And the 10 million people need to somehow wake up 50 to 100 million people. And the way that I found that you do it is simple. Talk to your neighbors, your friends, you know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then find a way that the globalists are affecting your neighbor, your friend, your family member, and expose the agenda to the person's experiences in their life. And when you can make the global agenda personal to people and show them this is why you're unemployed, this is why your kid's so much in debt because of college loans and so forth, this is why your son's serving 5 years for simple marijuana possession because of privatized prisons. Find the key for each person you're talking to, because our first step has to be to wake up people. We don't have enough people to make a change yet. We need to reach enough people to where we have a counter-critical tsunami that will sweep across this country and wash these people out of office that are serving the globalists. But to do that, we've got to wake up our neighbors.
Like you've talked about this before, and I believe you said it was contrived food shortages, but, correct me if I'm wrong, what does it take to snap people out of their trance in this continent?
It has to relate to something in their lives. What woke me up was the theft of my property rights in the name of the Canamex corridor being put through, and that woke me up to the North American Union, because that's where it came from, and then that opened up the whole globalist agenda for me.
Right.
Yeah, Sheila, I agree. I was going to ask a comment or make a comment earlier about the private ownership of land by ordinary citizens, which, of course, is something that they don't like. Obama wants the state to own everything, and people like Ted Turner wants to control it all. And as you said, he's the biggest landowner in North America.
Yes, he is.
And then also our friend T. Boone Pickens. So the private ownership of land and removal of that from individuals, and that's one of the things, of course, that as Dave said, will get people angrier than anything. That if they see their neighbor losing their property or losing their land without proper reason. But I also want to go back, as you know, Sheila, we've talked a great deal about the realism of the Founding Fathers, and they face the same question. How do they get the populace to realize what's being done to them by the British? How do they get them together and get them up off their backsides and onto their hind legs? And one of the key things was the writing and distribution of pamphlets. Now, to me, that's the equivalent of blogs and the internet.
Absolutely, Tim. That's why I have my website called The Common Sense Show, based on Thomas Paine's pamphlet.
Right. But Dave is adding another component to it. Dave is saying, no, not just writing these things and putting them out there, but making sure that people become aware of them, that people wait around handing out the pamphlets. Benjamin Franklin wrote them and printed them, but other people distributed them, and that of course is what the internet can do. Now, I think one of the things you're going to see is that they'll start to, in fact, there's already moves to control the internet to try and to prevent this dissemination of information, which of course is really the key. Once you educate the people, and you do it in very basic, simple terms, and as Dave said, you do it in a way that it affects their lives, the ways that are going to hurt them. And the other side do it very well. Al Gore's movie, Inconvenient Truth, is a brilliant but frightening piece of propaganda.
Sure.
And one of the ways I'll show you that is, of course, that the movie is all about the ice melting and flooding, and he has that animated computer simulation of New York going under, all the land being flooded.
That
and so on.
sci-fi horror, Tim, as I like to call it.
Yeah, but that's what people are afraid of. I mean, when I say to people, "What's wrong with global warming?" they can't tell you, and then they'll think for a minute and they'll say, "Oh, the sea level's going to rise." Well, why do you think that? Well, Al Gore told me so.
But Tim and Dave, try asking somebody next time they say global warming or, we're saving the planet. Ask them what they're saving the planet from, and it's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But I think Dave's hit it on the head. That each of us that understand what's going on, I've got to educate. Now, one of the ways, of course, and you're seeing it happening, is the takeover of the schools by the environmentalists, where it became indoctrination, not education, and where young people are coming into the universities already accepting the status quo, and where in the old days they came in and challenged the status quo. They've completely turned that on its head. But there is one positive thing, Dave, that I can tell you that I noticed just in my speaking to schools, but now has been confirmed by studies in Texas, that about 20% of the student population are saying to themselves, okay, you convinced me, the world's finished. I want the big house and the big car, and let's get on with it. And I suspect that there's a larger percentage of the population that are being equally as cynical. And so we've got to understand how the population are seeing and understanding these things, and then direct our education of them accordingly, but not directed in the way that they are now being directed, that is to achieve a total control of them, but to free them with education. That's the key thing.
So, Dave, I've got about 5 minutes left in the program. I want you to just take the floor and speak on whatever you want here as we come into the last 5 minutes.
Well, we don't have much time left. These agendas are moving at breakneck speed, and we're running out of time, and pretty soon we're going to be completely encircled. The enemy's already inside the gate. So, I really try to make it my mission to educate one person a day in just sometimes very low-key way, and I don't use the terminology that's common to the things that we do on the radio, but I try to educate at least one person a day. Sometimes I do more. And that really should be everyone's mission because your survival is based upon it. But if I were to also point people to look at something, I wouldn't send them to Agenda 21 documents any longer. I would send them to the transhumanism documents. If people could understand what the Rockefellers and the Turners and the George Soros have in store for the future of humanity, if they would just look at transhumanism and the hellish nightmare we're going to be living in and dying in, people would say, that's enough. I'm not going to go there. I'm drawing the line.
Well, you're right, Dave, because right now if people want to jump on www.2045, that's the numbers 2045.com. I mean, this is the UN's plan to completely, this is immortality, and this is complete post-humanization as we know it. I mean, we've got Matt Damon running around out there doing his movie Elysium, and we've got Gattaca, eugenics designer babies. We've got all these Hollywood-themed movies that are just slowly desensitizing us and bringing in things like Avatar. Because, I mean, really, 2045 Initiative is nothing straight out of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein meets pure eugenics. I mean, it is a sci-fi horror come to life, Dave. And if people would actually go in that, There's no question. And if people would actually go to that is a UN site. They've got a university of immortality they want to build. I mean, again, you've got people at the helm like Ray Kurzweil and others, these transhumanists that are supporting these people, uploading their brains to computers. And, I mean, this is, like I said, it is a sci-fi horror come to life. We're talking about the end of mankind as we know it.
It is. And just one last thing to close with, I'd say this. People need to realize that the globalists just aren't going to change humanity through transhumanism. Look at what they're doing to the planet. They are terraforming the planet. And in 100 years, if they get their way, mankind and this planet will look like an alien planet.
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, one of the things that I keep pointing out to people, if what Obama and Soros and all these people were proposing was completely new, you could say fine. Americans are more willing to try new things than any other people in history. But what they're proposing has already been, to some extent, done and failed. The alternate energies, for example, when you look at what's happening in Germany today, where they're abandoning wind farms and they're going back to coal-burning plants, and when you look at Europe and the European Union, which is supposedly an attempt to simulate the United States and the strength of the states, it's anything but. The people, the reason there are riots on the street in Greece is because they have no political mechanism by which they can protest about the way that the politicians and the bureaucrats are controlling and dictating their lives. And that's, of course, just a taste of what these people want to do on a global scale. So you've got, if you want, for the sake of a better term, a working example in the disaster that is the European Union.
That's right.
Couldn't agree with you more, Tim.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more, Tim. And Dave, I mean, excellent comments. I mean, I've always wanted to know what Obama thinks of this. Let's ask Obama and his group what he's doing here, shall we?
No, I don't know. I just don't know when exactly.
I certainly did not know anything.
There was no knowledge here at the White House.
Well, you hear that. There was no knowledge.
Okay, but just very quickly, Sheila, there was a guy that got into a lot of trouble because he dared to point out that if you asked Adolf Hitler about the death camps, he'd say, I had nothing to do with it, and there's not one shred of evidence, not one piece of paper that connects him to it.
Obama is really the quintessential Flexian, isn't he? Because you can never link him to anything.
Bred by communists to be a communist and take down this country. That's who Obama is.
Right out of his social playbook, huh, Dave?
Larry Grathwall exposed Obama for who he was.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and again, I'd like our listeners, you can jump on the www, the Common Sense Show. It's Common Sense Show, not the, right, Dave, or is it the Common Sense Show?
CommonSenseShow.com.
Okay, thecommonsenseshow.com, and they can find your handiwork on that site. And I'm really glad that you joined us. You're always a very, you're a big friend to Freedomizer, and, you know, we have tremendous respect for the work that you've done in the last decade, Dave.
Thank you.
You truly are just an absolute, well, the instigator of the airwaves, I used to call you, but I think now you're the hellraiser of the airwaves. I love your intro when it says, you know, he's mad as hell and he's not going to take it anymore. I love that. So we often watch your program Sunday nights, listen to it live on RBN. So I want to encourage everybody to, I first of all want to thank you for coming on the program today, Dave, and we'll certainly have you back.
Yeah, it's my honor. I'll come on anytime.
Okay, well, wonderful. And I want to just remind everybody that, you know, Dave, you said something very briefly that, you know, there's not enough of us awake. I just want to remind everybody that Jesus had 12 disciples. That's all I'll tell you. So thank you, listeners, for joining us today on The Antidote. Join me Thursdays at 5 on the Weekend Vigilante, and stay tuned for more great programming. And Jay is up next, so we'll take you out with our intro.
It's The Antidote with Tim and Sheila.
Speaking against the New World Order.
Counteracting deception. You won't hear that in 6 o'clock news.
This is a globally orchestrated meltdown to reshape the world into complete totalitarian global governance. Really, the end game here is so sinister, Luciferian eugenics plan. Ask yourself, how is it that out-of-control megalomaniac growth run things? Tyranny, fear-mongering, drones, geopolitical chaos, financial crises, mass censorship.
If you're planning, you've got to plan in a way to defeat the existing system.
Mindless minions, they're walking around in sort of a zombie-like trance.
I don't know. I just don't know what exactly.
I certainly did not know anything.
There was no knowledge here at the White House.
Do these guys know anything?
Out of control government gone mad. The founders would be horrified at what we've become. No, I will not comply.
Get ready for the epic new documentary adventure ride of your life. Shade the Motion Picture. A view into the globalist domain and embellish and Burma's film.
Nothing in this world works the way you think it does. Nothing. Governments do not operate the way you think they do. Banks do not do what you think they do. The police department is not here for what you think it is. Nothing in your world works the way you think it does.
We have to let them know that their world government has been identified, and they thought they'd include the world economy to bring in a worldwide police state, but instead it's going to bring them down.
You have to stand up, speak up, speak out. Shade the Motion Picture. Order your copy of the DVD today at shadethemotionpicture.com.